welcome to Positive Readings. Today I'm going to talk about Bohumil Hrabal's Closely Watched Trains. Hrabal is perhaps maybe the most famous Czech writer. He was born in Brno, and I think that would be Bohemia, grew up in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and writes about a lot about the occupation, the German occupation of that region, and the difficulties of life during World War II. I don't have much of a plan as far as what I'm going to look at with this book. I read this book about a few months ago, and I find myself continually thinking about two scenes from this book. And I thought that I could go back and look at these scenes now and maybe figure out why these scenes have stood out to me. So just a quick background, the novel begins with a German plane being shot over a field, and the people in this town go in to collect parts from the train, from the airplane. And our main character, Milos, is a 22-year-old, rides his bike out to try to gather some parts from the airplane. And we later find out that, get some background on Milos's story. His father or grandfather was run over by a German tank, kind of in protest of the occupation. And Milos is working at a train station, and by the time we get to the end of the novel, he's going to be taking part in some kind of sabotage activity as a way to get back at the Germans. So the parts that stood out to me in this novel is not so much the history of what was going on during the war, but more about this character's kind of strange preoccupations. He's got this love interest named Masha, but he cannot consummate their relationship, and that makes him feel inadequate. And that's a large part of what is a very short novel. It's only about 98 pages. Okay, so the parts I wanted to look at, though, involve it's a weird mix of both dead animals and this very kind of lovely romance, kind of this initial connection that Milos makes with Masha. So I'm going to begin by looking at this first scene where we get some of the kind of brutal treatment of the Germans on the Czechs, and what these characters kind of have to deal with as workers for this train company. So I'll just start here. The engine shook, the plains of snow receded, gleaming into the distance, thawing snow ticking away steadily with all its prismatic crystals. In a ditch lay 3 dead horses, just as the Germans had thrown them out of the wagons in the night. They simply opened the doors and threw out the corpses. Now they lay in the ditch beside the permanent way, legs stretched stiffly toward the sky like columns on which depended the invisible portal of heaven. Engineer Hongzik looked at me, and his eyes were full of grief and anger, because it was in his section that this close surveillance transport had been delayed, and it was certainly I who was to blame. So it was only justice that these SS men had forced me aboard the engine and were all the time waiting and wanting to be allowed to place the muzzles of their pistols to the nape of my neck, give the signal, press the trigger, and dispatch the bullets into me, and then open the little door. And we get that is ended with an ellipsis. So the idea is that he will also be thrown from the train, just like the horses, and end up in the ditch with them. That doesn't happen. This part follows a strange kind of logic where the narrator, Milos, says he can't imagine attractive people, and that's how he sees the Germans, as these handsome men. Can't imagine them committing some kind of bad act against him. This is followed by as they're on this train, they're out walking. They get off the train. They're walking to where these dead horses are, and this is for some strange reason this elicits the memory of when Milos first met Masha. So and this is only maybe a page or two after the section I just read. So I want to read that, and that will go into the horse scene, the particular scene that I said I kept recalling for some strange reason. I'll begin. I was drawn near the curve of the track. Already the 12 hooves of those dead horses were visible in the distance, jutting towards the sky like the columns in the cathedral crypt at Stara Boleslav. Again, we get that second metaphor or connection, simile here of the horse's hooves or being connected to religious symbolism. I thought of Masha and of how we met for the first time when I was still with the track superintendent. He gave us 2 buckets of red paint and told us to paint the fence around the entire state workshops. Masha began by the railway track just as I did. We stood facing each other with the tall wire fence between us. At our feet, we each had a bucket of cinnabar paint. We each had a brush, and we stippled away with our brushes opposite each other and painted that fence, she from her side and I from mine. So this is the beginning of this romance. We got these 2 characters on each side of a fence, and they're painting it as they go. So again, a bit of an odd way of meeting, a bit quirky, and that seems to be the theme with this character throughout this book. Let me keep going here. There were 4 kilometers altogether of this fence. For 5 months, we stood facing each other like this, and there wasn't anything we didn't say to each other, Masha and I, but always there was this fence between us. After we painted 2 kilometers of it, one day I'd done just as high as Masha's mouth with this red color, and I told her that I loved her, and she, from her side, had painted just up to there too, and she said that she loved me too. And she looked into my eyes, and as this was in a ditch and among tall goosefoot plants, I put out my lips and we kissed through the newly painted fence. And when we opened our eyes, she had a sort of tiny red fence pale strip across her mouth, and so had I, and we burst out laughing, and from that moment on, we were happy. So again, kind of a nice little romantic picture here, but this is directly followed with this. When I came to those dead horses, so again, that was a flashback, now he's back in the present of the story. When I came to those dead horses, I sat down on the belly of one of them and leaned my head against his leg. The head of the second horse was gazing at me with bulging eyes, as though even this dead horse had lived with me through what might very well have happened to me only a few minutes ago. So just to clarify there, our narrator is in fact just sitting on a dead horse. He walks up, sees these dead horses. Most people would be repulsed by this. I think he is emotionally repulsed by it, but he thinks nothing of just sitting on the stomach of the dead horse, leaning his head against one of its legs, and looking at another horse's face, kind of in this kind of horrific looking stare of anguish, and he imagines that horse has been with him with this fear that he just had that maybe he was going to get shot. So that was the scene that really stood out for me. That maybe you can call that my punctum. That's a scene that just, for some reason, I couldn't get that scene out of my head. And it's odd that it follows this kind of bizarre initiation of this romance. And as I read this now, I'm thinking maybe this romance is that fence between them clearly is representing perhaps the fact that they are currently being occupied, and that all they have is work, and try to find these little happiness within this kind of confined structure, in the sense that they cannot reach out to each other. At least that's how he describes it. Of course, there's an end to the day, each day, where they could interact, but this seems to be the moment how their romance is developing. Also, I think that, of course, we find out not long after this that Milos cannot rise to the occasion for their romance, and this has a deep effect on him, which he doesn't really come over or get past until one of the spies, one of the people working with them on this sabotage plot, a young woman, helps him, I guess, fulfill his manhood later on in the novel. All right, well, hopefully that gave you a little look at what this book is about. I think it's a fascinating novel, and I plan to go on and read some more of Hrabal, and perhaps make another video on one of his longer and more famous novels. I Serve the King of England, I believe it's called. So yeah, I recommend checking it out. Thank you for watching Positive Readings. If you like this, please like it and subscribe. Reading and writing are choices, so let's make them.